more of your time, but this was interesting. Bill Barnwell, who do you know Bill Barnwell at all?
I've never met him. Obviously, I've read his stuff for years and years, but I know I am aware of Bill Barnwell is what I will say.
Very smart guy, and he has an article out today on ESPN.com. And in his mock draft, he does a mock draft, but he does a mock draft in which every team has to be involved in a trade. And he puts together 32 trades, and it's
That's
pretty
incredible.
interesting. The one he had for the Niners was, I thought, riveting. Okay, he's got the 49ers trading Brandon Aiyuk, the 31st pick in the first round, their first round pick, and a third round pick to the Los Angeles Chargers for a sixth round pick and the fifth pick in the draft. And the Niners taking Malik Neighbors, the dominant wide receiver from LSU.
Oh my God.
This is a blockbuster. Now, Chargers have absolutely nothing at wide receiver. They got rid of Mike Williams. They got rid of Keenan Allen. Their first round pick last year is, had the case of the drops. The Chargers have the fifth most cap room of any team in the NFL now. And you look at Brandon Aiyuk, in a lot of ways, I could see him being a very popular guy with Jim Harbaugh. Why? Because he's a wide receiver that blocks in the run game. And he's kind of he's not a diva wide receiver. He's a blocker in the run game. And I could see Jim wanting to have a dominant blocker. We also have been, if you know Jim Harbaugh, he doesn't want to build. He wants to go to the Super Bowl this year.
Yeah.
And rookie receivers are kind of a 50-50 deal in the NFL. 50% of the guys become good. The other 50 crap out. To me, this is really interesting. Would you trade Brandon Aiyuk, your first round pick, and a third round pick for the fifth pick in the draft and a sixth rounder and take Malik Neighbors immediately? Yeah, you don't have your number one pick, but you do have the best, most explosive wide receiver in the draft, in my opinion. I like Neighbors more than Harrison even. You do have a dynamic guy who's going to be on a rookie contract for, the next 4 years or whatever. You kind of solve your cap problem. You move off of Aiyuk. You get a dynamic young weapon that can be your foundation piece. Would you make that trade? Would you make that trade if you're the Niners? Would you trade Aiyuk 31 and a third for Malik, the fifth pick for Malik Neighbors and a 6th round pick? Would you do it?
I think off the top of my head, yeah. But now I also just want to look at all the available options because I haven't even been setting my sights that high. It hasn't even been really theoretically possible. And I'm wondering, do I want to go with Neighbors or do I buy into this hype of you don't need to go elite wide receiver to win a Super Bowl? And there are a lot of great wide receivers in this draft. Maybe I can snag a guy in the later rounds, possibly. And I mean, it just gets interesting. I think I'm just a little bit too addicted to the draft, Larry, where if you give me more options, then I'm going to jump at that. But yeah,
let's just say that, the top of the draft is probably going Caleb Williams 1, Jaden Daniels and Drake May 2, 3, 3, 2. We're not sure. Cardinals are probably going to draft Marvin Harrison out of Ohio State, number 4. And that leaves the Chargers with the fifth pick. You could have Rome Odunze. I'm not a huge Rome Odunze fan. I think Michael Penix made him look better. Then you got Malik Neighbors. And then you also have the number 1 offensive tackle, in Joe Alt. You could go premier left tackle if you wanted to.
That's
Joe Alt, or you could go wide receiver and Malik Neighbors. Interestingly enough, the Niners did this. They had, DeForest Buckner. They traded him to Indy for the 13th pick or whatever it was, and took Javon Kinlaw, and it didn't work out.
Can I throw out a crazy one?
Sure.
What about Bowers? What about Bowers there? I have a theory.
Bowers. You could get a great tight end.
Well, I have a theory that tight end is not appropriately valued. When we see these Super Bowl teams and Super Bowl contending teams, they almost always have a great tight end. for whatever reason, the league just values wide receivers more. I mean, they get nearly twice the money tight ends get, but then that's more value to having a great tight end. Additionally, the bust rate on tight ends drafted in the first round is really high. That sounds scary, except Bowers seems like the rare just can't miss tight end,
And he's a
where
Bay
it's
Area kid. He's from Napa.
he's a Bay Area kid. I know Kittle is getting older. I think one of the utilities of a tight end, or one of the advantages actually, is that when they're great, they can play for a while. So I don't want to skip ahead to Kittle being cooked, but I like the idea. If we talk about Brock Purdy as an over the middle guy, and we look back to that devastating attack the Patriots had before Aaron Hernandez killed a guy with the two great tight ends, I'm very intrigued by that having Kittle and Bowers, um, I'm not wedded to any particular option right there. If you had a pick in that range, I'd want to look at it. I'd want to think about it. But I might not go Neighbors. I know the league values receivers more. I might go Bowers just because he seems so dynamic. And it's a position that I don't think gets its just due. And I think that actually might fit the skill set between the numbers, Brock Purdy, to go in that direction more so than going wide. So that's just a thought I throw out there.
Well, it's an interesting thing. And then, if the Niners really were moving off of Ayuk, you could, and they could get that high, technically, you could then start trading down the board and accumulating more picks, and you might actually be able to really, kind of win. As far as
Yeah.
get the player that you want, Brock Bowers, maybe you get him at 14, and you've made 2 or 3 trades to move, down the board after you moved up using Ayuk to get it done. Lots and lots of scenarios are going to be floated in the next 10 days. We know that for sure. Is there a player in this draft that you just love? Like for me, I'm a big Blake Corum fan. I know they don't need Corum, but I see Emmett Smith. I see a great running back with tremendous will. I see a real winner. I love him. I love Michael Hall, the center,
Mm.
the nose guard or the defensive tackle from Ohio State, and I love Zach Frazier, the center from West Virginia. He's got the wrestling background at 4.0 GPA, killer film. Those are kind of three of my favorite players in the draft. Or do you have a favorite player or one that you're really eyeing in this draft, Ethan?
It's funny because I love the center out of Oregon, Jackson Powers, because
Yeah.
just the speed and the violence, and there just seems to be a lot of utility or versatility, I should say, where you can put him in different positions. So I enjoy that guy. I'll tell you what, you've made me a convert on Muhammad Kamara.
Yes. So yeah.
I, I mean, what
The
what
defensive
round is
end
that
from
guy
Colorado
supposed to go?
State. Well,
Yeah,
they're
what
saying,
round is?
I've seen as low as the 5th round. I've seen as high as the late 2nd round. To me, he's a dominant defensive end, edge rusher who, if he's 6'1" and change, if he was 6'3" and change, I think he's like
Yeah.
the 15th or 18th pick in the draft. He's one of the most productive players in all of college football. The guy is a crazy athlete, unbelievable bend, tremendous motor, and really almost unmatched production. And to me, I think height is one of the more overrated elements of being a great defensive end. You're not batting down that many passes. It's about what kind of speed and acceleration and can you get your body parallel to the ground, and do you have great hand usage? Do you have strength? Do you have tenacity? Do you have a motor? He's got all those things. I'm a huge
Yeah.
Muhammad Kamara fan.
I mean, I like production, namely. That's the first thing. I know there are guys where maybe they didn't produce statistically, and maybe something about them was overlooked or scheme or whatever. But I just that's something I love. I love when I pull up Kamara's stats in these last 2 seasons, where he's got 16 tackles for a loss, 8.5 sacks in 2022. And then last year, 17 tackles for a loss, 13 sacks in 12 games. And when you watch him, he's just so quick. And I'm not saying he's going to be Hassan Reddick, but I see similarities there. And it's bizarre to me that you would get a guy like that with that sort of potential that low in the draft. I know that's a guy where if the Niners picked him, I would be very excited and very intrigued about him and Bosa. And I also just think when it comes to pass rushers, those guys are a little bit easier to hit on. I mean, I think that, for lack of a better way of putting it, I think the more thinky positions are the ones that you usually have busts. Those are the ones that are harder to predict a little bit, where it's more about what you got to keep track of. That might be why tight ends, it hasn't been as a reliable hit rate as other drafts. But the guys where your job is, kill a quarterback, those guys are usually fairly predictable. And Kamara's production and what I've seen on film, I love that guy. I'd be very excited if they got him.